So it's fair to say there's a lot of debates around electric vehicles, EVs, and one of the biggest kind of circumstances really when it comes to deciding whether it's best to have an EV, to have a hybrid, to have a traditional petrol or diesel powered car is the cost at the end of the day. Not only the cost of buying the vehicle, but also maintaining it. And most importantly, the most common thing that you do with a vehicle, refueling it. Now, there's a lot of different factors around, whether this is cheaper for you to do it with a petrol or gas powered car, or whether to do it with an EV. But Ed, you've done some research into what's in general for us in the West, us in Europe, and us in the US can expect when it comes to the cost of these.
Yeah, and the simple answer is it more cost effective or not, EV over gas? Well, it depends, as always. And so the way to look at this is that the cost of running an electric vehicle versus an internal combustion engine or an ICE car depends on the price of electricity, price of gas, and the efficiency, miles per gallon or kilowatt hours per mile of the vehicle. So let's look at the basic equation that you've got here, which is if you take the cost of electricity, and we'll use dollars per kilowatt hour, that's how you pay for electricity, times the amount of kilowatts it takes to move a mile, then you're going to get the dollars per mile for an electric car. Now, this is going to depend on the kilowatt hours that a particular car uses per mile. So a Model 3 is about 0.24 kilowatt hours per mile. A Nissan Leaf, Chevy Bolt, Hyundai Kona, for example, are all in that 0.25 to 0.3. Audi e-tron about 0.43. So you're in that 0.25 to 0.43 kilowatt hours per mile. Now, for an ICE car, it's really simple. You take the cost per mile in dollars per gallon of the fuel and divide by the miles per gallon that a car gets. So for that, I'm going to make an assumption anywhere from 25 to 30 miles per gallon. And we'll sort of look at that range. Now, the cost of electricity, here's where there's a big difference depending on where you are, US, say, versus Europe, and really the rest of the world. We're going to focus just on US and Europe as an example, because those are pretty much the two extremes. And then the other difference in the cost of electricity is if you're using a supercharger or not. Because when you go out, you're going to want to use that supercharger because you want to get that car charged up really quick. So let's take a look at the US first. So the cost of electricity in the US is anywhere from 10 cents to 30 cents per kilowatt hour. Gas is $3 to $4 per gallon. Sometimes it could be higher or lower. So the cost per mile to run an EV is roughly in that 5 to 7 cents per mile. And the cost per mile to run a gas car is in the 10 cents to 15 cents. So that's roughly 2 to 3 times more costly per mile to run a gas-powered car versus an EV if you charge at home. In Europe, gas costs roughly twice as much, and so does electricity. And as a result, the ratio is roughly the same. It's a little closer to 2.5 to 3 versus the 2 to 3 in the US, but pretty much in that 2 to 3 zone. Now, where the big difference comes in is if you're using the supercharger. Again, those prices vary, but it can be, in the US, it can be as high as 50 cents per kilowatt hour, right? Versus 10 cents to 30 cents when you do it at home. So what ends up happening then, and we'll use US first, you go from that 5 to 7 cents per mile cost for an EV to about 15 cents. And as a result, in the US, at that cost for charging in a supercharger, a gas car can actually be more cost effective. It can be roughly 70% the cost of the electric car to roughly equal. If we do the same comparison in Europe, right, there's not so much a difference in the cost in the supercharger. It's certainly not, it's not double like it is for home rates, US versus Europe. It can be about equal in cost to still being maybe 1.5 to 2 times more cost effective to have an electric car. So, end result, charge at home, you're way better off in cost per mile with an electric car. Use a supercharger in the US, you may be better off on gas when it comes to cost, to roughly the same, and in Europe, roughly the same to still a bit of an advantage.
Yeah, so in general, it is generally, for the most part, cheaper, significantly cheaper to run an EV than it is for an ICE car, basically. Now, I did a video recently for the Motoring Chronicle going over how you can actually save even more money. And like Ed said, one of the biggest ones you can do is to charge at home when you can. That's the biggest thing, really, because it's your thing. You're not using someone else's at the end of the day. And then you've also got benefits as well. I mean, it varies on country to country at the end of the day, but in the UK we have things called like things like road tax and stuff like that, which is significantly cheap. I think it might even be free. There is no road tax for an electric car compared to an ICE car. Just things like that really again varies depending on your territory and circumstances and everything. But yeah, that kind of runs through the difference really when it comes to that. Obviously, there's other factors too, and we've spoke at length about things like the crossover point. We spoke at length about things like, I've already done the video about the infrastructure really when it comes to that and how soon things will be ready. And there's different targets for different countries. And there's a lot of different factors at the end of the day, and everybody's unique with it. But despite its critics, in general, it's significantly cheaper to run an electric vehicle than it is for petrol, gas, diesel.
Yeah, and I think one thing we didn't look at here today is a hybrid. And a hybrid, the miles per gallon, at least how they're rated, can go from that 25 to 30 up to like 40. Now, is that an electric car or is that an ICE car? Running a hybrid is going to be probably the best, especially if you're going to be using the supercharger. If you're using a supercharger, then and because you're probably not using the supercharger with a hybrid when you're on the highway, you're going to be charging it at home. So overall, again, a hybrid looks good. But I think one of the most important things here, and not only on the cost per mile, but also we did one on crossover point, is I think a lot of times people would love that black and white answer. An EV is better or gas is better. And I think the real answer is take a step back and look at the numbers because the situation's different. High mileage car on gas versus a big electric SUV, that's being charged on a supercharger where it's very expensive is going to be way different when you flip things around. And so, but I think in the end, you said it right, more or less, it's going to be a little bit better or maybe even a lot better on the electric side. And over time, when solid state batteries come in and a lot of these other improvements, it'll continue to shift in that direction. But the number one thing, and you also mentioned this, is the infrastructure for charging. If you can't be confident that you can go somewhere and plug in and get that 50 cent per kilowatt hour, you're not even going to get an electric car in the first place. So these things are evolving over time, and I think the direction is probably shifting towards electric, but it's still a bit of a ways to go.
Yeah, we're somewhere in the middle at the end of the day, and that's something like you mentioned about plug-in hybrids. We've already done a video about how, in general, for most people, that might well be the best solution. But again, it just depends on your circumstances. I know someone who recently got an electric car because it was the cheapest option for them. I've seen data that shows that here in the UK, some used electric cars are actually cheaper than their petrol or diesel equivalents, which I find stunning. So again, just use use your common sense at the end of the day. Choose whichever solution is best for you. But you're right, it is going towards electric vehicles. I think they've still got some ways to go when it comes to infrastructure and also things like the overall range of them. Good old range anxiety, which is a phrase that I learned from you, but it's absolutely accurate. That is what it is. So yeah, do your research at the end of the day. We can give you as good of a general answer as we can, but everybody's different. Everybody's circumstances are different, and every electric car is different as well. So yeah, thanks for that, Ed. Thanks for going through that with me. Like I always say on these videos, we can, if you suggest a comment for us, we'll suggest a topic for us. We're happy to go through it sometime. Anything motoring, motorsport. Me and Ed can give our thoughts on that really. And yeah, thanks for watching. Keep it tuned here to the motoringchronicle.com to see much more videos just like this.